Hi, and welcome to Basic Folk, where we have honest conversations with folk musicians. I'm Cindy Howes. Thanks for finding this podcast. Oh man, Kaiti Jones's vibe is truly chill with that special something you experience in a real artist. So Kaiti's got that thing that should propel her to great heights. Like, her music is spot on in a way that is pretty rare, and as a human being, it feels like you're in the presence of some kind of greatness. Am I exaggerating? I don't know, but this woman is wicked cool. Her backstory starts in Portland, Maine, with her hippie Christian parents who met at a commune in the 60s. Kaiti learned violin using the Suzuki method, which is based in learning music by ear. After violin came training in piano, viola, French horn, cello, and drums. She discovered songwriting when her mom read her diary, and she found it as a way to simultaneously express and deflect her feelings. Then she finally picked up the guitar in the church band and realized that this would be the vessel for her songwriting. Kaiti moved to Cambridge 10 years ago to do service work as an AmeriCorps volunteer and has found much inspiration and joy in service, similar to the feeling she found creating music. The new album, Tossed, was finished during the pandemic. She worked remotely with her friend and producer Daniel Radin. He provided equipment and she recorded her parts at home. The electric guitar finds itself at the forefront of the album, so we have that ever-interesting conversation about electric versus acoustic. This album feels like a fully realized version of Kaiti's sound and her awesome spirit. I'm excited for what's to come for this impressive musician and very happy to have her on the podcast. We'll take a listen to a song from her new album, Tossed. This is actually the album opener, Light On, and then we'll get to our conversation with Kaiti Jones on Basic Folk.
So I don't wanna kiss you with the light on, with the light on. 'Cause in the dark, the blackest parts of my heart feel at home. 'Cause in the dark, the blackest parts of my heart feel at home. It's been a long, long time since 22, about the same time that I stopped loving you. Painting bodies in the summer, sculpted by the land. Oh, tell me what the hell's a girl supposed to do? 'Cause I could never wrap my head around the things you saw in me. I just wrap my arms around you in relief. And you name me as an art form, claim me as your muse, and I just laughed and gave away my unbelief.
Kaiti Jones, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. It's so great to see you.
Lovely to see you. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited.
I feel like we hung out for like 30 seconds at Folk Alliance in February of 2020.
It was like right before the world shut down.
Right. It was a great 30 seconds.
It was. I have fond memories of it. I feel like you, if it's possible to like accost someone with just like kindness, that's, I feel like, my memory of you. You stopped me in the hall and you were like, "You're Kaiti Jones. I'm Cindy Howes," and I was excited to meet you because I had heard a lot about you.
Yeah. I was also looking for, this is a little bit of a tangent, I was looking for Ally McGurk because I had Michelle Obama earrings that I just bought.
Yes, I remember that.
I'd given her one and I was looking for her to get it back and I ran into you. Mm-hmm. So my questions for you are you Kaiti Jones, and have you seen Ally McGurk? She has my Michelle Obama earring.
I have a vivid memory of that.
Yeah.
And were you, I think you were wearing one of them?
Yes, I had one.
Yep.
And then I think I had Allie's other earring in my ear. Wow. In the germiest place on earth.
Yeah.
Folk Alliance.
I think about Folk Alliance a lot and think like, wow, that was like, we really went out with a bang before we couldn't see anyone. It was like, let's cram like 100 people in one hotel room.
3 weeks later, it would have been a disaster. It would have taken out the entire folk industry.
Yeah, I wonder if Folk Alliance, started the pandemic.
All right, let's get down to business here. We got a lot of things to go over, and let's start at the beginning. You are from Portland, Maine, and I want to hear more about your parents. You say they met at a Christian hippie commune in the 60s. So tell us about your parents and also set the scene for what your home was like growing up.
Yeah, my dad is from California. He grew up in Southern California, and my mother is from Memphis, Tennessee. And they met in Santa Barbara in the little part of the city called Isla Vista, where a lot of people that go to UCSB live. And they basically, a bunch of people around like 1820s got excited about God and Jesus in the 60s and all kind of moved out to California because there was like this thing called the Jesus movement, and a lot of people were speaking, and it was this like kind of radical time where people were trying to kind of live in commune. As it has been described to me, it was trying to recreate the early church, as one might read in the New Testament of the Bible, where everyone kind of shared everything and everything was in commune and kind of lived in community. And so I have just years and years of hearing stories about, they occupied all these apartment buildings and just like went through and like knocked down all of the walls. So they were just like all connected, and they would have like house church meetings where like someone or like a couple would just like randomly say like, oh, by the way, this is our wedding. And so my parents, there's a picture in my parents' house of the two of them on a couch. And my dad's in this like corduroy suit, or probably just a corduroy blazer. My mom's wearing like a khaki skirt. And there's a sign that someone painted on the wall that looks like a child did it. And it just says, Ken loves Linda. And that was their wedding. And the whole wedding is on audio tape. And in the middle of the wedding, my dad invites all the children to come up, and he sings, plays the guitar and sings House at Pooh Corner by Kenny Loggins. So that is what I come from. But they decided in the 80s to move to Portland, Maine with like 20 of their closest friends to start a church. And that kind of fizzled before I was born. So but a lot of the people stayed. So I grew up in Portland it was an interesting situation because, especially in New England, it's a lot of, or I guess in any part of the world, it's common to maybe have family around. And so I grew up and all my friends had, their aunts, their uncles, their grandparents. And I just had like 20 families that were very culturally West Coast and all lived in my neighborhood, who were all basically like my aunts and uncles, but my actual family lived in California and Tennessee. Mm. Oh, and so you asked about what was the vibe of the house. It was very West Coast. I was saying this to someone the other day, that even though I've lived in New England almost my whole life, my housemates and I were talking about growing up and, calling adults like Mr. and Mrs. and just different things that are very New England. And my parents were always like, before I went to someone's house, they were like, you need to call them Mr. and Mrs. You can't, you need to be formal, because the culture of my family was very California and Southern. And my dad was just like the weird guy who would like show up at your house for dinner and like lie down on the floor and start stretching. Just like a very like hippie vibe.
But it's interesting that they like recognized that like that wasn't cool in other places.
I say that they were prepping me, but I may have just like figured out on my own after being like, hey, Janet, and like someone's mom being like, no, it's Mrs. Brown. And I was like, oh God, sorry.
That's got to be a real wake up call for a young hippie child.
Yes, yeah. And we would spend every summer, large chunks of the summer, either in California or Memphis. And so whenever I would return from one of those, it was like a lot more, oops, like I did I did the wrong thing. I was either too Californian or too Southern. But I would say, to summarize my household, it was just always full of people. Even though that church community had disbanded, that mentality of having a million people in your house and just having your doors open and, inviting random people to holidays, that was definitely the vibe. We had a small house, but there were always people randomly living with us for like months at a time.
So how did that experience help shape your relationship to community?
I think it was incredibly instrumental. I don't know, there's not a time in my life where I didn't have rich community, and I'm even though that's true, it's not something I take for granted, because I think it's a tremendous gift and not something that everyone has. But I think the mixture of seeing the example from my parents of, what you have in this life is meant to be shared, especially if you've been given a lot, has made me always want to be generous with what I have, generous with my home, and kind of inviting people into my life and making them feel welcome. So both like in my personal life with friends and in my vocation and doing community work, and even with songwriting, like so much of it is like inviting people in. I think it's a big part of that.
I have a couple questions about religion. In reading about and listening to a song on your new record, Mystic, it's very complex what the song is about, but just to like sum it up, it was inspired by transitioning your mindset from like rigid evangelical Christian culture to a more open spiritual mindset. And so you are from that like conservative evangelical Christian hippie culture, which is interesting. And then you also say that you've noticed people who grew up like that transition from either high church or post-evangelical communities. So a couple questions, just like tactical questions, like what is high church, post-evangelical, and what was your religion like growing up?
Yeah, so one thing I'll say off the bat is that I have spent pretty much my entire life in various types of churches. So there is a lot of like technical language that I find is like true of any like one that anything you're like really into, like there's like all the like subgenres that people like that aren't as into it are like, what are you talking
like goth.
about? Exactly. Yeah. Or like punk and hardcore and like yeah. The church that I grew up, it was interesting. So I described, like, my parents had come from this, what would be described in the kind of theological world as like very low church, which means not a lot of, but low to high would be like, lowest is we're all meeting in the living room and I guess this is a church service and we're just with friends. And then highest would be like Catholicism, where there's a lot, or Greek Orthodox or any Orthodox church, where there's a lot of history and just rules and customs.
Structure.
Yeah, exactly. And also thus like a lot of consistency around the world. In like, if you go to a Catholic church around the world, it's probably going to like feel similar. Mm-hmm. So they came from that tradition of very low church, where there's not a pastor. It's kind of just someone speaks. But then that kind of fell apart, and they ended up, interestingly enough, raising us in a Baptist church in Portland that they have told me and my brother, they just kind of chose it because it had a great program for kids and there were a lot of kids around and we hadn't been in the area long. So I grew up thinking I was a Baptist. My brother then grew up and went to theology school and decided, to inform us all that we weren't, or that we were Baptist. Or my parents would always say, we're not Baptist. And my brother then later was like, we are Baptist. Anyways.
Is he older than you?
He is. He's 2 years older.
Yeah.
And yeah, my brother and my dad both went to theology school and then decided to do their careers in taxes. So interesting, iconic duo. So I grew up in a Baptist church until I went away to college. That was yeah.
Wow. What is your religion like now?
It's a great question. I ask myself that every day. I am a part of a church in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Actually, how I ended up living here. I moved here 10 years ago to work at a church through an AmeriCorps program. And it is it is a Christian, non-denominational, very more progressive, low church.
Sounds more like medium church.
I would say, yeah, it's medium. It's like we're actually in an old renovated Catholic church, so it's really getting creative.
Ooh, medium high.
But like so like perfect when they bought the building and redesigned it, they like literally flipped it backwards. So like we enter the back of we enter the front of the church and like face the back, which I just think is it is a little more practical, but I just think it's like kind of a hilarious thing that they're like, we're not Catholic. We're going to literally like have backwards church.
That'll show them.
Yeah. But yeah, it's how would I describe my religion? I would describe myself as a person of faith. I think my faith journey has looked very differently throughout the years. I think as I get older, I think when I was younger, the faith I was brought up in, especially in the church community, was very like, these are the questions and these are the answers and you can be sure. And that was in some ways really nice and really like safe. And I think as I get older, I have fewer answers and am living a little bit more in the mystery of things. But I am still someone that like tries to connect with God and thinks that Jesus and the teachings of Jesus and the just like the beauty of community and what he preached and is still something that I really try to live my life by as best I can. But finding a lot of joy and purpose and like enlightenment in a lot of new types of new to me theology that's a little bit more progressive and talking about God as a God of justice and equity and that a lot of voices that I just didn't grow up reading, mostly because they're like black and brown folks and indigenous folks just having a very different take on theology.
Wow. We'll get back to religion. I'm sure.
Like, I wasn't prepared to talk about religion. I should have been, but
all these questions are about you, Kaiti Jones. I read that you are a notorious daydreamer, which is such a great description. You have a new song on the record called Daydreamer, and you say, I like to think people who daydream just have a rich inner life, which is cool. I want to know about your experience with daydreaming from a young person to an adult.
This is something that I can talk about because I've been thinking a lot about this recently. So I, ever since I can remember, have been kind of scolded in pretty much every setting, starting with school, at home, church, for daydreaming and for, drifting off. In growing up in school, my mom said she would always kind of go into parent-teacher conferences, like with her eyes squinted a little bit, like with her hand out to shake them, kind of like, what are you going to say? She said everyone, like the general theme was like my teachers really enjoyed me because I was, a charming, smooth talker, and very, very
Flipped
outgoing.
up collar.
Yeah.
Making finger guns.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Oh gosh. No, I was like a likable kid, so they didn't want to get me in trouble, but I was always in trouble for, I was like the classic kid that right at the end of the teacher being like explaining everything, I would raise my hand and be like, what are we doing? So I think it's something that, has always been true, just getting kind of lost in thought, not even realizing it, kind of like whether I'm like driving and then suddenly I'm like, how did I get here? And I realize I've just been thinking about something, or, struggling to pay attention in school or being present to, even sometimes when I'm playing shows, like I'll realize, wow, I just played like 7 songs and I was thinking about like Gossip Girl or something. So I think it was always something that I felt like guilty about. And I remember being just told like, this is something you need to stop doing. You just like need to get it under control. You need to be present. And it's something that there's certain moments in our lives where it's good to be present. There's a lot of parts of life where it's good to be present. And I want to be present often. But I, in the last couple of years, have tried to, and specifically the last few months, have really tried to like be a little bit kinder with myself, and not have like so much shame about not being able to control my mind in like every moment. And then just kind of starting to like explore like, well, what's happening when I daydream? What am I thinking about? And realizing, most of the times I write songs, that's what's happening. Like, I remember even today I was on a walk and I was trying to figure something out. And then all of a sudden 30 minutes later, I realized like I had written half a song and that wasn't something I had planned on. And, that doesn't always happen when I daydream. It's not always productive, but just trying to look at it in more of a positive light and more of a gift rather than just having these negative messages all the time of like, well, this is something bad about you that you need to change. So that quote of, people having a rich inner life, it's a little bit tongue in cheek. But that is what I'm trying to tell myself is like, yeah, it's actually fine. It just means I'm enlightened in this moment. And
oh, of course. Yeah. So interesting to then learn that you started playing violin using the Suzuki method, which is based on learning music by ear, like really listening and paying attention and not daydreaming.
Yes.
What was it like for you to learn that way, and how did learning by ear impact the way you listen to music and otherwise?
That's an interesting question. I've thought a lot about how Suzuki has, so I think that the best asset that Suzuki has offered me is just being able to kind of pick things up by ear musically, and just being able to like hear a song and figure it out, or not be able, if someone's like, can you play this song, and not having the charts, like being able to kind of figure it out. I do think Suzuki lent itself to that. I think the thing about Suzuki is that you don't really have a choice in terms of, tuning out or tuning in, because it's the other thing about Suzuki is repetition. So they will make you play Twinkle Twinkle like 700 times. So even if you're tuned out for the first 50, like you're gonna get it. And I think it actually was helpful because I didn't have to study. I didn't have to like read the the sheet music, and I could just kind of like hear over and over and over what was happening, and eventually kind of just like tune in. The other thing is Suzuki growing up was extremely communal. So there were like a lot of people around you all doing the same thing. And I think the last important ingredient was that my teacher was absolutely terrifying. So I was I was very present to to those moments.
You
even
responded, you responded to fear.
Yeah, absolutely.
You identify as a storyteller first and a musician second in like training and knowing all those different instruments. I want to know like how you came to love storytelling, listening to, and also telling stories, and where that joy lives for you.
I have always loved telling stories. I have very early memories of writing short stories. I had this little binder. It was turquoise, pink, and purple. I still have it at home.
That's a great color combo.
It really was. That's why I've kept it. And like they don't make them like they used to. And I I had a series of stories that I would write, and they all had like the same theme. It was always like the little blank that lost its blank. So like the little pencil that lost its tip, the little shoe that lost its lace. And I must have written like dozens of these stories, and I was really into story webs. I think I learned that maybe in elementary school of like how to make a story, and like you start with like plot and setting, and then like it webs out. My problem was my webs always got bigger and bigger and bigger, and so I never finished any of these stories. They never resolved. So I don't know, maybe that's why I got into songwriting, because it was like, all right, this is a manageable story that I don't, or maybe I already know the ending, so I can tell it. But yeah, I don't know exactly, because I wasn't a huge reader as a kid. Like I read, here and there, but I've always loved, like, I was always the kid that would like come back from like playing outside and have some like fantastical story to tell. I was definitely always viewed, all of my stories in my family were always viewed with a little bit of like, like, did that actually happen? Just like always like a little bit of a stretch. And to this day, I mean, even in like groups of friends as adults, like if there's some communal story, like the go-to is like, just have Kaiti tell it, because like she's, she loves to tell stories. So I think there's something about live storytelling that I love, because you get to see people, it's like a two-way street. You get to see people's reactions and then kind of feed off their energy, and like you can tell, okay, like they're really like jiving with like this part, or I should like dig into this, like this is getting a response. And I think that is very similar to playing live shows, and that's I think, I'm grateful for all the live stream opportunities this past year, but it is so different to not have that two-way energy where you're like, you can just see joy or sorrow or laughter coming from the audience. And that's something that in its various forms has always been something I've been drawn to throughout my life.
You went to Belmont in Nashville for writing and philosophy. Can you talk more about the interest in philosophy and how that intersects with your desire to keep asking questions?
Absolutely. So I remember when I stepped into the philosophy department at Belmont, there was this quote on the wall, and it was a Kierkegaard quote. I can't quote it perfectly. I had it on my wall until earlier this year, but it's basically like a series of questions that are like, who am I? What am I? How did I come to be here? Why was I not consulted? Where is the director? I want to see him. And it just stopped me in my tracks, and it felt like someone had understood me for the first time in my life. Like I feel like as like a tiny person laying in bed at night, I was like reciting that Kierkegaard quote like every night, but just like didn't obviously not in those words, but like I just was such an angsty kid. I was always like, but like, why are we here? And like, what's going on? And like, what's real? And like, what is the mind? And what are thoughts? Like, it was just like a really high college kid, but I was like 7 and I was just like, so I think I've always just been really interested in kind of being and like the meaning, I guess, like the meaning of everything, and certainly have explored that in faith and church settings, and then also just, I think, philosophy, like learning how to think and learning how throughout history different people thought about being was just so interesting to me. And it felt like a place where it was okay to be like freaking out about existence. And that was encouraged. And those were the kinds of conversations we were having.
That's what happens when you have low church.
So
no
true.
rules, no structure.
That's true.
I didn't have any of these problems. I was raised Catholic. You know what the rules are.
Highest of the high.
I remember one time I was dating somebody and we were talking about like different ways to like use shampoo. And I was like, well, this is how you use shampoo. And he's like, that's right, because we don't ask questions about anything. We just do what we're told. And I was like, exactly. It makes the world so much better. No, it doesn't. You're right, Katie.
Is there like a Catholic doctrine on shampoo? Because I feel like they have rulings on most things.
Right. You stand away from the shower head because to stand towards the shower head is perverted.
Well, we stand towards the shower head because, we flip the Catholic Church backwards at our church. So
interesting. So you moved to Cambridge 10 years ago for an AmeriCorps volunteerist.
Ism is right.
You also got your master's at Boston College in social work, and you have worked in community engagement and youth development. How does your experience of your youth impact your desire to do this particular type of work?
Oh, of my youth, like as a youth growing up?
Yeah, as a ute.
As a ute. That's a great question. It's interesting. I think like I could take it in two directions. I'm discovering myself right alongside you, Cindy. Part of me, so I realize, growing up, I grew up in Maine, as we talked about, and I grew up in a neighborhood that was super, full of kids. It was very safe. My parents were we only had a TV in the winters. So in the summer it was like, all right, find something to do. So very just like finding friends around the neighborhood and building community and getting into mischief and playing laser tag. And also just having a really, really tremendous amount of adults who cared about me, who were not my parents, who genuinely loved me and wanted to see me thrive. And I think in the work that I do and have done for the last 10 years, I want to be at the very, very least, like apart from all the systemic change that, I hope to be a part of and have hoped to be a part of throughout the years. I just want to be someone who, a loving, caring, supportive adult, for a young person who maybe has that and maybe doesn't. Maybe I'm just one of many. Maybe I'm the only one they have. And to be able to see the relationships that I've built through the years, kids I met when they were 8 years old who are in college now, and just having that relationship and being a consistent person in their life. I think that's something every young person deserves. And unfortunately, it's not something every young person has. So I do think I was incredibly privileged in so many ways growing up the way that I did. And then also I think more on the systemic level. So I studied macro social work, which is more looking at policies, programs, organizations that can either hinder or advance equity and access. And, just realizing I grew up as a white girl in Maine with two parents in a middle class neighborhood. And there's a lot of stuff that I was very ignorant to that, because I took it for granted. And so kind of interrogating, looking at the systems that young people, particularly in communities of color, which is mostly the communities that I've worked in Boston and Cambridge, just things that kids are up against that like I didn't have to deal with, whether it's racism, whether it's public schools being inadequate, or, violence, just there's so many things. And so I've just wanted to be a part of affecting positive change on both like an individual and a macro level.
Well, the new album Tossed is out now. This episode's being released on April 1st, and it came out March 5th. It's
Yes.
Great record. And the recording experience for you was pretty different this time around, working with Daniel Radin from the band Future Teens. I loved the story about how like the pandemic started, everything shut down, and then you recorded. Daniel just like dropped the recording equipment off and you did your own vocals and fiddle thanks to your, I don't know, did you play fiddle as well as your roommate?
No, just my roommate, Emily.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. And like how the opposite of like, that must have just been the opposite of like what you had experienced before. He's just like, okay, go ahead. But how can you talk about how you guys work together in the sense of like flow and how you empowered each other?
Yeah, working with Daniel was absolutely amazing. I would definitely recommend to anyone out there who is looking for a producer. I wasn't surprised because Daniel's someone who I've known for a few years. He's made, he used to be in a band, The Novel Ideas, that was like more in the folk scene. And then he started doing some production stuff and had worked with my good friend Haley Sabella on a record, and then did a couple other records, and I just really liked them. And then every time I met him, I was just like, this person is so kind and gentle, and just doesn't seem like he would bring, unless he's like completely like Jekyll and Hyde, like I don't think he's gonna get in the studio and be like, all right, here's what's gonna happen. And I think just from the very beginning it felt really low pressure, because I think we both went into it like from the get-go being like, I really want to work with you, which is always a great place to start when you're partnering with someone. And I think because I trusted him, I was able to not have, so it's interesting because like I think it could have been easy for me to come in kind of with my defenses up from previous experiences, being like, all right, like I'm not going to take any input from anyone, which of course would be a terrible idea. But because I trusted him, I was a lot more receptive. And he would always just like offer a gentle suggestion, like, what if you did this? Just try it once. We don't have to do it. And it was, I would say like at least 50% of the time, I would say 100% of the time I would be like, absolutely not. And I would be like, that's a terrible idea. I hate that. And then I would try it begrudgingly, and then it would grow on me. And I think some of my favorite parts of the record are things that Daniel, they were his ideas, and just like helping me, whether it was like, hey, I think we should have like 7 guitars on this, or I'm going to play a nylon string guitar at the end and it's going to sound like weird and beachy, and or I think you should double the chorus, or I think you should go right into the second verse, like just things that I think now I'm like, oh, it's like such a stronger song. So we live 10 minutes apart, so I would just go to his basement. We would just kind of chip away at songs. I would play them for him, and then we would just kind of start bouncing ideas off of each other. And I would bring like reference tracks of, songs that I really liked that I was kind of like thinking of.
What were some of those songs?
Julia Jacklin. Man, I have to choose a song. Body. Body by Julia Jacklin is like one of my favorite songs from the past couple of years. Time Fighter by Lucy Dacus has just this like insane rock breakdown in the middle, which I don't really think we have an insane rock breakdown on the record, but a lot of like
fairly rock and roll.
It's definitely a lot more rock and roll than my last stuff. Thank you so much for still allowing me on Basic Folk.
Of course. You were right on the wire.
Oof. Well, that's why I threw in Daydreaming. That was just for you. So
thank you.
Be a little bit
Thank you
acoustic.
For centering your musical aesthetics around me.
Of course. Yeah, a lot of rock, definitely like some like Adrian Lenker, Big Thief. I'm a big Phoebe Bridgers fan. David Ramirez, he kind of threads that like folk.
What a dreamboat.
He actually helped me with some of the writing and production on Getting Around to It, which was awesome. I'm obsessed with him. He is a great artist.
I'm obsessed with that song, Getting Around to It.
Thank you.
And I was wondering, like, it's about procrastination, which some of those lines are so hilarious. Like, and I wrote down this line, but I can't say it verbatim. And it's like, basically, you're singing about how there's a little kid inside of you that could probably tear you apart, but she won't get around to it because she's procrastinating. Anyways, you have to listen to the song you'd have to get it. But okay, so procrastination. So how has like focusing in on procrastination, and because you're a smarty pants, you recognize that your procrastination is centered around fear and uncertainty. How has focusing on that changed your relationship to both of those attributes?
To fear and uncertainty, or to procrastination? Ooh.
Fear and uncertainty, which are connected to procrastination. You see what I did? I made a story web. You
did. And you actually, you wrapped it right up. That was, it wasn't like a trailing participle.
Didn't start off well, but it ended really tightly.
It was great. It was a beautiful story. Now I'm trying to remember what it was about.
Daydreaming.
Yeah. How did learning about realizing this help me think about fear and anxiety? Was that the question?
Yeah.
These are all very recent revelations, I will say. So like we're working this out in real time right now.
Live on the scene.
Yes. Woo. And also I believe today, what a weird thing to say. I believe today is my birthday. But I think that it is like when this is airing. So
when's your birthday? Is it April 1?
It is.
No joke.
No joke. But no, that sounds like a tangent, but I was just thinking about like I would like to have more of a proclamation on my birthday of like, I've solved all the problems, but, no, we're still live, still buffering. Fear and anxiety. Yeah. I think that there's so much fear. I'll just say, I'll use I pronouns rather than like people, because who knows what people feel, but I feel like there's just so much fear about getting things wrong, and it is just so unhelpful. It just, no good comes from it. It just gets in the way, it blocks the door, and it prevents me often from starting something meaningful or that could be really beautiful, even if it's flawed. And I think there's just a lot of anxiety about like, well, if I do this the wrong way, or if I say the wrong thing, or if I, offend someone or make someone unhappy, what does that mean? And I think from an early age, I was definitely a kid that wanted to make people happy and smile. And I think there's positive parts of that. But there's also, I've just been learning, like, you know, not everyone has to be happy all the time, at least on like my account, or I don't have to be responsible for everyone being happy
Katie,
with me.
You should look into narcissism.
Oh, yeah? I feel like...
There's some good traits there for you, I believe.
Well, I mean, I'm a songwriter, so I am a narcissist. I think I had that.
It might be a healthy dose, you know?
That's true. Well, maybe I am a narcissist, but I'm just too proud or prideful to let you know. So then I shroud it in people pleasing. Ooh.
Whoa.
That's my birthday revelation. I'm a terrible person.
I feel really manipulated. We've been talking for an hour. All right, why don't we wrap it up by hearing about DJ Magic 1?
Well, it actually is DJ Magic. It's just the I is a 1. DJ Magic is not someone that I talk that much about anymore. She's kind of retired, semi-retired. I used to have a side hustle as a DJ. So I mentioned I moved here to do an AmeriCorps job, and I did that for 2 years. And
were you the organization's wedding DJ?
I wasn't, but AmeriCorps workers basically are paid nothing. So I was looking to get creative on the side, and I started by DJing a friend's wedding, my boss's wedding at the time. It was just like, oh, can you just, you know, DJ this? I had never done it before, but she knew I, you know, had good music taste, or I like to think I did. And it was at the Park Plaza, downtown Boston, and my payment was I got to stay in the presidential suite and invite like 8 of my like closest friends.
Nuh-uh.
And it was so dope. Like there were like 5 bedrooms. There was a grand piano. We got the catering at the end of the wedding. We got them to bring up all the leftover food from the wedding reception. And we just had this like epic after party. So I think that was like, it was all downhill from there. Cause it was like, I would like to be paid for every gig with the presidential suite at the Park Plaza. But after that, especially in like the church world, like, you know, it's like a bunch of young people getting married all the time. And
you got to be at the ready because you just never know when a meeting is going to turn into a wedding. Like, yeah.
Yes. So I just started, it was like word of mouth. I did about like 15 weddings. I've done like some events at Harvard. I've done some like old people's birthday parties. And it's a kind of a stressful situation, but it's fun once you get into it. Again, back to like, I guess to finish the web of my story that I started at the beginning, it's like, it is one of those things where you're really the two-way communication, where you can tell very quickly if people are like digging what you're doing, or if they're like, I DJ'd a couple South Asian weddings, and I remember I had like an older Sri Lankan man just like yelling at me about not playing enough Sri Lankan music, and I had like his daughter had given me certain music to play, and I had played all of it like 3 times, and I was like, I'm so sorry. But definitely a lot of through the years, like you either get people that are like, this is the best night ever, and then you get people who are like, why didn't you play my song? So it's helps you get thick skin. It's good, but it's important. People remember food and music from weddings, so totally. It's high stakes.
I think it would be an interesting podcast to listen to different wedding DJs from different countries talk about like the absolute jams that you have to play. Because I was talking to that band Middle Kids. I did an interview with them, and they used to be in a wedding band. And they were talking about, they're like, there's this one Australian artist, I don't remember who it is. And then like Hannah, the lead singer, she was like, this is getting really in the weeds. I was like, no, I want to hear it. Like this one artist that you have to play at an Australian wedding. And then if you ever saw Dairy Girls, There's that.
It keeps being recommended to me. I haven't yet.
Oh my
dived
God.
in.
My favorite episode, there's a wedding scene and they play this like really obscure disco dance song called Rock the Boat. And everyone freaks out and gets on the dance floor and does this like weird synchronized like seated electric slide type of dance.
Sounds awesome.
Yeah. So you got to watch that show. I'm going to go watch it right now, actually.
I
It's
definitely
so
will. I love talking about that stuff because I have found that there's DJs have a very specific like science, and like everyone kind of has their own. And whenever, I think the downside to starting to DJ is like anytime I would go out dancing, as I was wont to do in my 20s, I would just like, I couldn't enjoy it because I was like, oh, like I don't
No, I know
like
how you
the way
feel.
this- Like it's like I am, to summarize, I don't like it when they like play like 20-second clips of your favorite songs, because it's just like right when you get to the part, like people don't want flashy stuff where it's like, oh, like you did all these crazy sound effects and you played 30 seconds of every top 40 song.
Right.
People want to be able to dance with their friends and sing along to the parts they want. You also at a wedding have to think about the different demographics, and I always go with the chronological. Like you can't start with Lady Gaga followed by Frank Sinatra. Like it's a faux pas. So we can talk offline more if you ever want to hear about the science of DJing weddings.
I would love
Or
to.
if you want to hire DJ Magic. She's semi-retired, but she'll, for the right gig, she'll dust off her
Cans.
well, yeah, exactly.
Calm cans.
Yep.
All right, Kaiti Jones, let's do the lightning round. I heard you've been listening to some Basic Folk episodes, so this will show me whether or not you've listened all the way through. This happens at the end of most of them. These are all very fun questions. You're going to enjoy it.
I can't wait.
All right, here we go. What was the first song you learned on the guitar?
Reptilia by the Strokes.
What is your karaoke song?
Save a Horse, Ride a Cowboy.
No, it's not.
I've only done karaoke twice in my life, and that was one of the times. And it was like so great that I was like, I don't need to do karaoke anymore. It was so fun.
Dogs or cats or something else?
Dogs all day.
Who was your first celebrity crush?
Oh, the boy from Air Bud. Kevin Zeger.
Who is the nicest musician you've ever met?
Elisa Amador.
Oh, she is so nice. First album you bought with your own money?
Oh, man.
That you remember?
Probably Switchfoot.
Praise. The lead singer of Switchfoot has a new album coming out.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
It's on like Christian Capitol Records or something like that.
Really? I feel like
Yeah.
he hasn't been in like the Christian music world for a long time.
Well, listen.
I haven't listened to them in like over a decade, so I don't know. But I did
Jesus
like
is
them.
Always there.
But
First
yes.
concert.
Oh gosh, I'm sure it was some terrible Christian rock. Yeah, it was DC Talk.
I don't even
it-
know what that is.
You know, that's fine. I don't think you're lacking for anything. But if you want to look them up, they're 90s Christian rock, and it's really a moment.
What was the last book you read?
It's called If You Want to Write by Brenda Euland. It's a book from the 30s. It's this like really hilarious writing teacher and professor talking about how to write, and she's really funny and great.
Flying or invisibility?
Flying.
Star Trek or Star Wars?
Wars.
Last question. Where is the most beautiful place you've ever visited?
That's a tricky one. I'm just gonna have to go with the coast of Maine.
Yeah, good answer. All right, Kaiti Jones, congratulations on the new album. This has been really fun talking to you and can't wait to like hang out in person.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I am a big Cindy House fan and basic folk fan, and I just appreciate all that you do to support artists, and this was a lovely conversation.
Basic Folk this week was produced by Sweet Baby Angel Laura McCarthy. Alex Stanton of Townspeople does our music. Basic Folk is proud to be on the American Songwriter Podcast Network. You can find all of the episodes of Basic Folk wherever you get podcasts and at my website, cindyhouse.net. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend, like and subscribe, and hopefully we'll see you next time. Thanks for listening. Okay, bye.